The courtroom fell into a deathly silence, the terrified kind where every heartbeat feels audible from 3 rows back. Judge Harlan Voss, a man who wielded his gavel like a weapon, leaned forward over the bench with a sneer that had shattered countless lives. He fixed his gaze on the 16-year-old boy trembling in the orange jumpsuit, a boy whose only crime was existing in the wrong neighborhood. "I don't care what your excuse is, son. I'm not here to listen to fairy tales from delinquents," he spat. He was about to destroy Darius Caldwell's life forever. But the judge had no idea about one crucial thing. The man sitting quietly in the back row, wearing a faded coat and a baseball cap, was no ordinary spectator. He was the one man with the power to end Judge Voss's career with a single phone call, and he was about to stand up. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B of the clunky, brutalist municipal court building in downtown Chicago had been broken. The air hung thick with the smell of sweat, floor wax, and desperation. Judge Harlan Voss loved the heat. He felt it made the defendants weaker, more pliable. Voss was a man of 65, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain to sour. He did not simply preside over his courtroom. He ruled it like a petty warlord. To the affluent residents of the North Shore, he was a tough-on-crime hero. To the public defenders and the families in the South Side, he was simply the butcher. "Next case," Voss barked, not even glancing up from his paperwork. He adjusted his glasses, the light reflecting off the lenses so his eyes remained hidden. The bailiff, a heavyset man named Officer Beaumont, who had long ago stopped caring about justice, shoved a file toward the bench. Docket number 4492, State versus Darius Caldwell. Charges: trespassing, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. A ripple of low murmurs swept through the gallery. Darius Caldwell was brought in. He was 16, though he looked younger. Slight, with wide, intelligent eyes now darting around the room in sheer panic, he wore the standard-issue oversized orange jumpsuit that hung off his thin frame, making him look like a child playing dress-up in a nightmare. He was handcuffed. "Uncuff him for the hearing, Beaumont," the public defender, a harried woman named Lena Hargrove, said sharply. Lena was good, but she was exhausted. She had 40 cases today. Darius was just number 22. "Judge's orders," Beaumont grunted. "Defendant is considered a flight risk." "A flight risk?" Lena shot a look at the bench. "Your Honor, he's an honors student with 0 priors. He was arrested for sitting on a bench outside a tech conference. This is ridiculous." Judge Voss finally looked up. He took a long, slow sip of his water, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. He peered over his glasses at Darius. He did not see a terrified kid. He saw a statistic. He saw a stereotype. "Miss Hargrove," Voss said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the room, "I decide who is a risk in my courtroom. And looking at the police report, refusal to vacate premises, belligerent tone with officers, it sounds like a risk to me." "I wasn't belligerent," Darius blurted out, his voice cracking. "I was waiting for my dad." The gavel slammed into the wood so hard a dust mote danced in the sunbeam. "You speak when you are spoken to, boy," Voss roared. The venom in his voice was palpable. "You are in a court of law, not on a street corner with your friends. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt before we even hear the plea." Darius shrank back, shoulders hunching. He glanced desperately toward the back of the room, scanning the faces in the gallery for any lifeline. "The plea is not guilty, Your Honor," Lena said, stepping between the boy and the judge's glare. "And we move for immediate dismissal. The police report is full of contradictions. Officer Beckett claims Darius was loitering with intent, but Darius had a valid ticket to the keynote speech happening inside the venue. He was just waiting for his father to arrive with his ID." Voss laughed, a dry, humiliating sound. "His father? Let me guess. The father was running late, or perhaps he's out of town, or maybe, just maybe, he doesn't exist. A few snickers rose from the court clerks, conditioned to laugh at the judge's cruel jokes to stay on his good side. "My father is coming," Darius whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "He said to wait." "I told you to be quiet," Voss snapped. He turned his gaze to the prosecutor, a young, ambitious man named Nolan Whitaker, who wore suits that were too shiny and cologne that was too strong. "Mr. Whitaker, what is the state's recommendation?" Whitaker stood, buttoning his jacket. He did not look at Darius. "Your Honor, given the rise in youth crime in the downtown district and the defendant's refusal to cooperate with Officer Beckett at the scene, the state requests bail be set at $50,000 and a remand to the juvenile detention center until trial." Lena gasped. $50,000 for trespassing, Your Honor? This is a child. His family can't afford that. You're ensuring he stays in jail for months for a crime he didn't commit. Voss leaned back in his leather chair, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He loved this part, the raw power, the ability to snap his fingers and change a life forever. He studied Darius, taking in the cheap haircut and scared posture, and rendered a judgment forged from 20 years of prejudice. "It's time we stopped coddling these kids," Voss said, addressing the room more than the lawyer. "They think the world owes them something. They think they can go where they want, do what they want. Not in my city, not in my courtroom." He picked up his pen. "I'm denying the motion to dismiss. And frankly, Mr. Whitaker, I think you're being too lenient." "Your Honor, please," Lena pleaded. "Just look at his school records. I have them right here. Straight A's. Captain of the debate team. He has a scholarship to—" "I don't care if he's the captain of the Space Force," Voss shouted, his face reddening. "I don't look at school records. I look at criminal records, and he's starting his today." In the back of the room, the heavy oak doors creaked open. Usually entering while the judge was speaking was a quick way to get thrown out, but the man who entered did not seem to care. He slipped in quietly, almost like a ghost. Tall, wearing a nondescript beige trench coat despite the heat, a baseball cap pulled low and dark sunglasses, he did not sit. He stood by the back wall, folding his arms. Judge Voss did not notice him. He was too focused on destroying Darius. "Darius Caldwell," Voss intoned, "you are hereby remanded to the county juvenile facility pending trial. Bail is set at $100,000. $100,000? Darius cried out, panic finally shattering his composure. "I didn't do anything. Please, I just wanted to see the speech." "Get him out of here." Voss waved a hand at the bailiff. "Wait," Lena yelled. "Your Honor, this is a violation of—" "One more word, Miss Hargrove, and you'll join him in a cell," Voss warned. Officer Beaumont grabbed Darius by the arm, roughly hauling him up. "Let's go, kid." "Dad!" Darius shouted, eyes locked on the doors. "Dad!" Voss scoffed, organizing his papers for the next victim. "He's not coming, son. Learn that lesson now. You're on your own." "No, he's not." The voice came from the back of the room. It was not loud, but it carried a timbre and authority that sliced through the humidity and noise like a razor blade. A voice accustomed to being obeyed in rooms far more important than this one. Judge Voss froze. His head snapped up. Every head in the courtroom turned. The man in the trench coat stepped forward. "Who said that?" Voss demanded, squinting. "Identify yourself or be removed." The man walked down the center aisle with a steady, calm, terrifyingly confident gait. He did not rush. He moved as if he owned the floorboards beneath his feet. As he passed the rows of spectators, the air itself seemed to shift. "I said he's not on his own," the man repeated. He stopped at the wooden gate separating the gallery from the court floor. Slowly he removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were sharp, cold, and burning with suppressed rage. Then he took off the baseball cap. A few gasps escaped from the older lawyers in the room. Judge Voss squinted. The face was familiar, older than the last time it had appeared in the newspapers, lined with the stress of high office, but unmistakable. "I am Darius's father," the man said. "And who do you think you are interrupting my court?" Voss sneered, though a bead of sweat trickled down his temple that had nothing to do with the broken air conditioning. "I held this boy on $100,000 bail. Unless you have a checkbook in that coat, you're wasting my time." The man smiled. It was not a nice smile. "I don't have a checkbook, Harlan. But I do have a subpoena." The use of the judge's first name sent a shockwave through the room. No one called Judge Voss by his first name. Not the mayor, not the police chief, only his wife. And rumor had it she rarely did even that. Judge Voss's face turned a violent shade of purple. "You dare address the bench with such familiarity? Bailiff, seize this man. Contempt of court." Officer Beaumont released Darius, who was sobbing quietly, and moved toward the stranger. "I wouldn't do that, officer," the stranger said calmly, not even looking at the bailiff. "You're under arrest for—" "If you touch me," the stranger continued, his voice dropping an octave, "you will be interfering with a federal investigation. And Officer Beaumont, considering your pension is already under review for those misplaced evidence bags in the dockets, I don't think you want to add obstruction of justice to your file." Beaumont froze. His hand hovered in midair. His face went pale. "How do you know about that?" The stranger ignored him and turned his full attention back to Judge Voss. Voss stood, his robes billowing. "This is outrageous! Who are you?" The stranger reached into his inner coat pocket with slow, deliberate movement. The prosecutor, Nolan Whitaker, looked as if he wanted to dive under his table. He had recognized the man. Whitaker was young. He watched the news. He followed the big federal cases. He knew exactly who was standing in the aisle. "Your Honor," Whitaker squeaked, voice trembling, "maybe we should take a recess." "Quiet," Voss barked. "I want this man in cuffs." The stranger pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. A gold badge caught the fluorescent light, gleaming with an authority that overshadowed everything in that municipal building. "My name," the stranger said, his voice ringing off the walls, "is Victor Langford, but you might know me better as the United States Attorney General." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, suffocating. Victor Langford, the man who had single-handedly dismantled the organized crime syndicates in New York in the 90s, the man appointed by the president to clean up judicial corruption, the man whose face had been on the cover of Time magazine. And he was Darius Caldwell's father. Judge Voss fell back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Darius," Victor said, his voice instantly softening as he looked at his son. "Are you okay?" "I tried to tell them, Dad," Darius stammered, wiping his nose on his shoulder. "I told them you were coming. They wouldn't listen." "I know, son. I know." Victor's eyes hardened again as he looked back at Voss. "I was delayed because I was parking the car, and then I was detained at the security checkpoint because your deputies didn't believe I was who I said I was. It seems to be a recurring theme in this building, judging a book by its cover." Voss found his voice, though it sounded as if he had swallowed gravel. "Mr. Attorney General, I had no idea the boy—" "His last name is Caldwell. His mother's name," Victor said crisply, "which he uses to avoid the spotlight, to avoid people treating him differently. Or, in this case, to avoid people treating him with basic human dignity." Victor pushed open the gate and walked onto the court floor. He did not ask for permission. "I have been standing in that back corner for some time," Victor said, pacing slowly in front of the bench. "I watched you. I watched you ignore the evidence. I watched you mock a public defender. I watched you set a bail amount that is constitutionally excessive for a minor with no prior record. And I watched you refuse to hear a single word of defense." "I was merely following procedure," Voss stammered, sweat now running freely down his face. "The docket is full. We have to move quickly. Zero tolerance." "Zero tolerance," Victor repeated, tasting the words like sour milk. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a systemic violation of civil rights under the color of law. Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. The color drained completely from Voss's face. That was a federal crime, a felony. Now, Victor said, turning to the stunned court reporter, I want the transcript of the last few minutes preserved immediately. If a single word is deleted or altered, everyone in this room goes to federal prison. Is that clear? The court reporter nodded frantically, her fingers hovering over her machine. Mr. Whitaker? Victor turned to the prosecutor. Yes, sir. Mr. General? Sir. Whitaker stood so fast he knocked his chair over. Move to dismiss all charges against Darius Caldwell with prejudice. Done, Whitaker yelled. Motion to dismiss immediately. The state apologizes. We had no idea. And Victor continued, his eyes locking onto Judge Voss. I think we need to discuss why you refuse to hear the case. Because, Harlan, you and I have met before, haven't we? Voss's eyes widened. He looked like a trapped animal. I don't recall. Oh, I think you do. Victor smiled, the smile of a predator that had cornered its prey. Law school? The ethics hearing? You remember that, don't you? You got off on a technicality then, but you don't look like a man who has learned his lesson. Victor walked over to Darius. He gestured to Officer Beaumont. Uncuff my son now. Beaumont fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. Finally, the cuffs clicked open. Darius rubbed his wrists, looking up at his father with awe. Are we leaving, Dad? Darius asked. No, Darius, Victor said, placing a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. We aren't leaving. Not yet. You see, I came here to pick you up for the conference, but it seems I've stumbled onto a much bigger case. Victor turned back to the judge. I am invoking my authority under the Judicial Oversight Act. Judge Harlan Voss, you are to step down from the bench immediately. You can't do that, Voss shrieked, finding a shred of his arrogance. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a state court. You are a federal officer. You can't just walk in here and fire me. I'm not firing you, Victor said calmly. I'm arresting you. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. On what grounds? Voss screamed, standing up, his robes flaring like the wings of a bat. On the grounds of racketeering, bribery, and fraud, Victor said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Did you think we didn't know, Harlan? Did you think the Department of Justice wasn't watching the private youth detention center you send all these kids to? The one that pays you a consulting fee for every bed you fill? The courtroom erupted. The room, previously a tomb of silenced voices, had transformed into a cauldron of noise. The revelation of the consulting fee, a polite euphemism for a kickback, hung in the air like toxic smoke. Judge Harlan Voss gripped the edge of his mahogany bench so hard his knuckles turned the color of bone. He was a man accustomed to being the hammer, not the nail. The sheer audacity of Victor Langford's accusation had momentarily stunned him. But Voss was a survivor of Chicago politics. He knew indignation was the best shield for the guilty. This is preposterous, Voss bellowed, his voice cracking with a mix of rage and genuine fear. You come into my courtroom, disrupt my proceedings, and slander a sitting judge. I will have your badge, Langford. I will sue you for defamation, and I will see you disbarred. Victor did not blink. He stood in the center of the courtroom floor, his presence absorbing all the frantic energy of the room and grounding it. He turned slowly to the gallery where dozens of parents sat, mostly mothers, mostly tired, wearing work uniforms or Sunday bests, clutching tissues. They looked at him not just with curiosity but with a dawning, horrific realization. Miss Hargrove, Victor said, turning to the public defender who still stood beside Darius. She looked shell-shocked. You mentioned earlier that you had 40 cases today. How many of those were juvenile defendants sent to the Oak Ridge Youth Detention Facility? Lena Hargrove blinked, her mind racing to catch up. She looked down at her stack of files, hands trembling as she flipped through them. I'd say about 30, maybe more. Judge Voss almost exclusively remands to Oak Ridge. He says the county facility is overcrowded. Overcrowded? Victor repeated, the word dripping with irony. He reached into his trench coat again. This time he did not pull out a badge. He pulled out a thick, bound document. It landed on the prosecutor's table with a heavy thud. This, Victor announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room, is a financial audit of the builder and operator of the Oak Ridge Youth Detention Facility. It details a series of shell companies, Voss Consulting, HV Holdings, Hammer, and Stone LLC. Victor walked closer to the bench, eyes locking onto Voss's. Do those names sound familiar, Harlan? Because according to bank records subpoenaed by the FBI, Hammer and Stone LLC receives a monthly deposit of $15,000 from the Oak Ridge operator. And curiously, the deposits spike every time you have a heavy docket week. A woman in the third row of the gallery stood up. She was wearing a nurse's scrub top. My son, she shouted, voice shaking. He sent my Quincy to Oak Ridge for stealing a candy bar. He said he needed discipline. Is that why? So you could get paid? Sit down, Voss roared, pointing his gavel at her. Bailiff, remove that woman. Officer Beaumont stays right where he is, Victor commanded. Beaumont, sweating through his uniform shirt, took a distinct step away from the judge, clearly deciding which way the wind was blowing. You traded children for cash, Victor continued, his voice rising and shedding its calm exterior to reveal the burning fire of a father and a prosecutor. You took honor students, kids with special needs, kids who made one mistake, and you fed them into a private prison system because you hold equity in the company. You aren't a judge, Voss. You're a human trafficker in a robe. The accusation hit the room like a physical blow. Lies, Voss shrieked. He was standing now, frantically gathering papers, looking for an escape route that did not exist. It's a conspiracy. This is political. You're trying to ruin me because I'm up for the appellate court. I'm trying to ruin you because you tried to ruin my son, Victor said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, and because you succeeded in ruining hundreds of others. He turned to the court reporter, whose fingers were flying across the stenotype machine. Let the record show that the Department of Justice has seized the servers of the Oak Ridge facility. We have emails, Harlan. Emails where you specifically requested higher occupancy rates to trigger your bonus clauses. Voss slumped back into his chair. The fight was draining out of him. The terrifying reality of the situation was setting in. This was not a local scandal he could squash with a phone call to the mayor. This was the United States Attorney General standing in front of him with a paper trail. Darius, Victor said, turning his back on the judge. Come here. Darius walked over to his father. He looked small next to the imposing figure of the Attorney General, but he stood straighter now. Victor put an arm around him. This boy, Victor said to the room, was going to be number 4,492. Just another number in the ledger, another check in the bank account. How many of you? He swept his arm towards the gallery. Have children who were just numbers to this man? The room erupted. It was no longer mere noise. It was a release of years of pent-up agony. My daughter, one man yelled. My nephew, cried another. He gave my boy 5 years, a woman sobbed in the back. The anger was palpable. It vibrated in the floorboards. Order, Voss tried to bang his gavel, but the sound was weak and pathetic. Order in the court. There is no order here, Victor said. Only evidence. He nodded to 2 men in suits who had just entered the rear doors. FBI agents. They moved down the aisle with practiced efficiency. Judge Harlan Voss, Victor said formally. You are under arrest. Voss looked at the agents, then at the bailiff, then at the prosecutor. No one moved to help him. Whitaker, the prosecutor, was busy frantically writing notes on a legal pad, likely drafting his own plea deal to avoid going down with the ship. You can't do this in front of the cameras, Voss hissed, realizing the courtroom sketch artist was working furiously, and someone in the back had a phone up, live streaming. "Oh, we aren't just doing it in front of the cameras," Victor said, cold, hard steel in his voice. "We're doing it in front of the people you hurt." The FBI agents ascended the bench. It was a sight that defied the natural order of the legal world. Usually the bench was a fortress. Now it was a trap. One agent moved behind Voss, pulling his arms back. Click. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut on the wrists of a judge was the loudest sound in the world. "Please," Voss whispered, his arrogance finally shattering into a million pieces. "My back? Be careful with my back?" "You didn't care about my son's back when you threw him against the cruiser," a voice shouted from the gallery. As the agents led Voss down the steps of the bench, stripped of his robe, he looked small. He looked old. He looked like just another criminal. Victor blocked his path for a brief second. "One more thing, Harlan," Victor said. "I'm requesting a special prosecutor. Someone from out of state, someone you don't play golf with. You're going to get a fair trial, which is more than you ever gave these kids." The transition from the seat of power to the bowels of the system was a journey of only 3 floors. But for Harlan Voss, it felt like a descent into hell. The elevator ride down was silent. The FBI agents, Agent Reyes and Agent Patel, did not speak to him. They stared straight ahead. Voss, still in his dress shirt and slacks but without the robe that had given him power, felt naked. The handcuffs bit into his wrists. He had complained about them to the agents, citing poor circulation. But Agent Reyes had simply replied, "Standard procedure, sir," in a tone that suggested he did not care in the slightest. They walked him through the booking area. Usually Voss entered this building through a private judge's entrance. He had never seen the booking room from this side of the glass. It smelled of bleach, old coffee, and unwashed bodies. It was loud, chaotic, and dehumanizing. "Name?" the booking officer asked. He was a young man, new to the force, and he did not recognize the disheveled man in front of him immediately. "I am Judge Voss," Harlan snapped. "You know who I am, you imbecile. Uncuff me this instant and get me the police commissioner on the phone." The booking officer did not look up. He slowly typed on his keyboard. "Name is Voss Harlan. Judge. Occupation civil servant. Turn to the right for the photo." "I will not turn to the right, or we add resisting to the charge sheet," Agent Patel said calmly. Voss turned. The flash blinded him. He was fingerprinted. The ink felt greasy and vile on his skin. He was told to remove his belt and shoelaces. "My shoelaces," Voss sputtered. "These are Italian leather Oxfords. I am not a suicide risk." "Policy," the officer droned. "Can't have you hanging yourself or strangling a cellmate. Take them off." Holding his expensive trousers up with one hand, shuffling in his unlaced shoes like a toddler, the Honorable Judge Harlan Voss was led to a holding cell. "Not general population," Voss pleaded, panic rising in his throat. "You can't put me in with them. I sentenced half the people in this building. They'll kill me." "Administrative segregation is full," the officer said, checking a clipboard. "We got a big sweep on the south side. You go where there's room." They marched him to cell 4. The heavy steel door slid open with a grinding screech. Inside, sitting on the metal bench, were 3 men. One was asleep. 2 were playing cards with a deck that had seen better days. They looked up as Voss was shoved inside. The door slammed shut behind him. Voss pressed his back against the bars. The heat was stifling. It smelled of mildew and urine. "Well, well," one of the men said. He was a large man with a tattoo of a spider web on his neck. He squinted at Voss. "You look familiar?" Voss turned away, staring at the concrete wall, praying for invisibility. Meanwhile, upstairs in the judge's chambers, now a crime scene, Victor Langford sat on a leather couch, watching Darius sip a bottle of water. Lena Hargrove was pacing the room, still running on adrenaline. "I can't believe it," Lena was saying, shaking her head. "I've suspected it for years. We all whispered about it, but we never had the proof." How did you get it?" Victor sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked tired. The rage had subsided, leaving behind the exhaustion of a father who had almost lost his child. "We've been investigating the private prison industry. A whistleblower from the construction company gave us the lead on the shell corporations. We knew a Chicago judge was involved, but we didn't know which one until we matched the transaction dates to the docket schedules." He looked at Darius. "I didn't know it was Voss until I walked into that courtroom, and I certainly didn't expect my own son to be the catalyst." "I'm sorry, Dad," Darius said quietly. "I shouldn't have argued with the cop. I should have just left." "No," Victor said firmly. He leaned forward, taking Darius's hands. "Listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You have a right to exist in public spaces. You have a right to wait for your father. If you had just left, Voss would still be on that bench tomorrow. You stood your ground in a way. You caught him." "But you saved me," Darius said. "I did my job," Victor corrected. "But Darius, this is why I didn't want you to use my name. Why we live quietly. Because I wanted you to make it on your own merits. But I realized today that the world doesn't let you do that yet. And that is my failure, not yours." There was a knock on the door. Nolan Whitaker, the prosecutor, poked his head in. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. "Mr. Attorney General?" Whitaker asked weakly. "Come in, Nolan," Victor said, his voice cold. Whitaker stepped in and closed the door. "I want to cooperate fully. I didn't know about the money, I swear. I thought being tough was what the office wanted. I wanted to win cases." "Winning cases isn't justice, Mr. Whitaker," Victor said. "Justice is finding the truth. You were so eager to put a 16-year-old in a cage. You didn't even look at the evidence. You're part of the problem." "I know," Whitaker whispered. "I'm willing to testify. Voss pressured us. He would call us into his chambers and scream if our conviction rates dropped. He threatened to report us to the Bar Association for incompetence if we didn't request maximum sentences." Victor nodded slowly. This was the testimony they would need to ensure Voss did not wiggle out. "Sit down, Nolan. Start talking. And Miss Hargrove," he nodded to the public defender, "you might want to take notes. I have a feeling you're going to be very busy with appeals for the next few years." News of the arrest spread through Chicago like a wildfire. The hashtag Judge Voss was trending nationally. The story had shifted from a local corruption scandal to a national referendum on the juvenile justice system. The video of the Attorney General standing up in the back of the courtroom, captured by a sneaky law student on a cell phone, had millions of views. The title of the video was simply, "The Father He Didn't See Coming." But for Harlan Voss, the world had shrunk to a 10 by 10 concrete box. The holding cell was dark, lit only by the flickering fluorescent bulb in the hallway. Voss had not moved from the corner. He was thirsty, but he refused to drink from the sink attached to the toilet. The cellmates had left him alone, mostly because they thought he was just another white-collar criminal who would be bailed out soon. They did not know who he was, until the dinner cart came. A guard walked by, sliding trays through the slots. "Chow time," the guard grunted. One of the cellmates, the one with the spiderweb tattoo, picked up his tray and looked at the guard. "Hey, officer, who's the new guy? He's too quiet. He a snitch?" The guard laughed, a cruel sound. "Him? Nah, that's Judge Voss. You remember him, don't you, Torres? He's the one who denied your parole hearing." The air in the cell changed instantly. Voss looked up, eyes wide with terror. The guard smirked and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. He had left Voss to the wolves. Torres turned slowly. He dropped his tray. It clattered on the floor. "Judge Voss," Torres whispered. A smile spread across his face, but it did not reach his eyes. "Well, isn't that something? You told me I was a menace to society. You told me I didn't deserve to see my kids. Now listen," Voss stammered, holding his hands up. I was just following the guidelines. It's nothing personal. It felt personal when I missed my daughter's 3rd birthday, Torres said, taking a step closer. The other 2 men in the cell stood up, sensing the shift in power. I can help you, Voss blurted out. I can make calls. I can get your case reviewed. You ain't a judge anymore, Torres spat. I saw the news on the TV in the booking room. You're nothing. You're just fresh meat. Voss backed into the corner, sliding down the wall until he hit the floor. He curled into a ball. Guard! Guard! He screamed. But nobody came. This was the administrative delay he had so often dismissed when defendants complained about their treatment. This was the system he had built. Torres stopped a foot away. He did not hit him. Instead, he leaned down and spat on the floor right next to Voss's expensive Italian shoe. I ain't gonna touch you, Torres said with disgust. You ain't worth the solitary time. But you're going to sit there and you're going to listen. We're going to tell you every single thing that happened to us in the cages you put us in, and you ain't going to sleep. Not for a second. And that was Voss's night. He sat in the filth, forced to listen to the stories of the men he had dehumanized. He heard about the lost jobs, the broken marriages, the children who grew up without fathers, the abuse suffered inside the prisons he sent them to. It was a psychological torture far worse than any physical beating. It was the mirror of his own soul being held up to his face. Meanwhile, Victor Langford was holding a press conference on the steps of the courthouse. Dozens of microphones were thrust in his face. Flashbulbs popped like strobes. Darius stood by his side, looking tired but composed. Mr. Attorney General? A reporter from CNN shouted. Is it true that the corruption extends beyond Judge Voss? The investigation is ongoing, Victor said, his voice steady. But I will say this. Judge Voss is a symptom of a disease. The disease is the monetization of human misery. When you put a price tag on a prisoner, you create a market for guilt, and we are going to shut that market down. What about your son? Another reporter asked. How does he feel? Victor stepped back, allowing Darius to step up to the podium. Darius looked at the sea of cameras. He took a deep breath. I was scared today, Darius said, his voice cracking slightly but gaining strength. I was scared because I knew I was innocent, but it didn't matter. The judge didn't see me. He saw a check. He saw a dollar sign. I want to say to all the other kids who got sent away by him, you aren't forgotten. My dad is here and we're going to get you home. The crowd cheered, a genuine emotional sound. Back in the office of the state prosecutor, Nolan Whitaker was sweating through his 3rd shirt of the day. He was sitting across from 2 FBI agents. I can give you the construction company, Whitaker said, his hands shaking as he held a cup of coffee. And I can give you the names of 2 other judges who took dinners with the developers. We want the top, Agent Reyes said. Voss didn't build this alone. Who approached him? Who set up the accounts? Whitaker swallowed hard. He looked at the tape recorder spinning on the table. It was the senator, Whitaker whispered. Senator Marcus Hale. He owns the land the detention center was built on. The agents exchanged a look. The thread was pulling and the whole sweater was about to unravel. The mention of Senator Marcus Hale was not just a spark. It was an atomic detonation. Senator Marcus Hale was a fixture of Illinois politics, a man whose face was plastered on billboards every election cycle under slogans like family values and safe streets. He was the kind of man who kissed babies, cut ribbons at hospital openings, and quietly owned half the real estate development firms in the Midwest through a complex web of blind trusts. He was untouchable, or so he thought. The sun rose over a Chicago that felt different. The air was charged with a static tension. Inside the FBI field office, Victor Langford was staring at a whiteboard covered in photos, red string, and financial printouts. He hadn't slept. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms tense with stress. We have Whitaker's testimony, Agent Reyes said, pinning a photo of the sweaty prosecutor to the board. He confirms Hale set up the initial meeting between Voss and the developers years ago. Hale's brother-in-law owns the construction firm that built Oak Ridge. And the kickbacks? Victor asked, sipping coffee that had gone cold. Routed through the Cayman Islands, Agent Patel added, tapping a stack of papers. We traced the IP addresses of the wire transfers. They originated from Hale's private office in Springfield. They got greedy, sir. They stopped using the shell companies for the smaller transfers and just went direct. Victor stared at the board. The picture was horrifyingly clear. This goes deep. Hale used Voss to fill the prison to justify the state contract. The more kids in cages, the more money the state paid the private facility, and the more money Hale's family made. It's a perfect circle of corruption, Reyes said, shaking his head. It's a meat grinder, Victor corrected, his voice low and dangerous. And we're going to jam the gears. Victor picked up his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Mr. President, Victor said when the secure line clicked open. Victor. The voice on the other end was groggy but alert. This better be good. It's better than good, sir. It's the end of Senator Hale's career, and I'm going to need the U.S. Marshals. Judge Voss's bail hearing was set. Ironically, it was in courtroom 4B, his own courtroom. But this time the bench was occupied by Judge Elena Moreau, a woman known for her fairness and her absolute loathing of judicial corruption. And this time Voss was the one in the orange jumpsuit. The gallery was packed to capacity. It was not just reporters. The room was filled with the families of the children Voss had sentenced. They sat in silent judgment, a jury of his victims. The silence was heavier than any shout. Voss looked terrible. His hair, usually dyed and coiffed, was gray at the roots and unkempt. His face was unshaven. The nights in the holding cell with the men he had wronged had broken him. He flinched every time a door opened. Mr. Voss, Judge Moreau said, her voice icy. You are charged with 42 counts of wire fraud, 15 counts of bribery, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. How do you plead? Voss's lawyer, a high-priced shark named Vance, who usually got people off on technicalities, stood up. My client pleads not guilty, Your Honor, and we request bail be set at a reasonable amount. My client is a pillar of the community. Reasonable? Victor Langford stood up from the prosecution table. He had taken personal jurisdiction over the case, a move that signaled to everyone just how personal this was. Your Honor, the defendant held my son on $100,000 bail for a trespassing charge. He has millions stashed in offshore accounts. He is a flight risk of the highest order. Agreed, Judge Moreau said, banging her gavel. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in federal custody until trial. Voss slumped against the table, putting his head in his hands. But we aren't done, Victor announced. He turned to the back of the room. Bring him in. The heavy oak doors swung open. Senator Marcus Hale walked in, but not with his usual campaign swagger. He was handcuffed, flanked by 4 U.S. Marshals. He looked pale, sweating profusely in his expensive Italian suit. The courtroom gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Senator Marcus Hale, Victor said, his voice booming like thunder. You are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. It seems your Safe Streets initiative was just a retirement fund. Voss looked at Hale. Hale looked at Voss. In that look, an alliance died. He did it! Voss screamed, jumping up and pointing a shaking finger at the senator. He forced me. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't keep the occupancy numbers up. I was just a pawn. You shut your mouth, you incompetent fool, Hale shouted back, struggling against the marshals. You were the one who asked for the bonus checks. Order. Judge Moreau banged her gavel so hard it sounded like a gunshot. The defendants will be silent. But the damage was done. They were turning on each other. The Kids for Cash scandal had claimed its kings. The trial of the century had ended. The evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the financial records, the tearful testimonies of Whitaker and the terrified clerks. It all painted a picture of greed so profound it made the public sick. Harlan Voss was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. Given his age, he would likely die behind bars. Senator Marcus Hale got 35 years. But the real victory was not the sentences. It was what happened after. Victor Langford stood on the sidewalk outside a large brick building. It was a crisp autumn day. The leaves were turning gold and red, dancing in the wind. The building used to be the Oak Ridge Youth Detention Facility. But the sign was gone. In its place was a new, colorful banner, the Darius Caldwell Community Center. The state had seized the asset under forfeiture laws. The building that was once a warehouse for children was being converted into a school, a gym, and a free legal aid clinic for low-income families. Victor stood with Darius, who was now 17. Darius looked different. He stood taller. The fear that had lived in his eyes in that courtroom was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. "You did this," Victor said to his son, nodding at the building. "We did this," Darius smiled. "I just sat on a bench, Dad." "Rosa Parks just sat on a bus," Victor said softly. "Sometimes sitting is the strongest stand you can take." A woman walked up to them. It was the nurse from the courtroom, the one whose son Quincy had been sent away for stealing a candy bar. Next to her was a boy about Darius's age. He looked shy, hesitant, wearing a new backpack. "Mr. Langford," the woman said, tears welling in her eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of the review board you set up, Quincy is home. His record was expunged." Victor shook the boy's hand. "It's nice to meet you, Quincy. Stay out of trouble, okay?" "Yes, sir," Quincy said, grinning. "I'm going to the coding class inside. They said it's free." "And Darius," the woman said, turning to him. She reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for being brave. If you hadn't stood up, my boy would still be in there. You saved him." Darius blushed, looking down at his shoes. "I just wanted to wait for my dad." "Sometimes," Victor said, putting a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. "Waiting is the hardest part, but justice always arrives eventually." They watched the woman and her son walk into the center, laughing. "So, Darius," he said, adjusting his own backpack, "does this mean I can finally get my driver's license? Or is that too risky for the son of the Attorney General?" Victor laughed, a deep, genuine sound that felt good after months of stress. "Let's negotiate. If you can keep your grades up and avoid getting arrested for sitting on benches, maybe we can talk about a learner's permit." "Deal," Darius said. "Come on," Victor said, opening the car door. "Let's go home." They got into the car, a father and a son. They were just two people in a big city, but they had changed the world. They had proven that even when the gavel is heavy, the truth is heavier. And somewhere in a cold federal cell, Harlan Voss was staring at a blank concrete wall, realizing that the boy he refused to hear was the one voice he would never, ever forget. And that is the incredible story of how one arrogant judge crossed the wrong father and brought down an entire empire of corruption. It reminds us that justice isn't just about laws. It's about people standing up when the system fails them. Darius Caldwell didn't know he was starting a revolution when he sat on that bench, but his courage and his father's unstoppable power saved thousands of lives. It makes you wonder how many other judges like Voss are out there right now. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see the good guys win for a change. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. What do you think? Was 28 years enough for Judge Voss, or did he deserve more? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.